The sun was hiding behind the hills, and the golden light was beginning to dissolve into the deep blue of the afternoon. I remember looking at that sky and feeling that there was something different in the air. It wasn't fear yet. It was just that silent pressure that precedes storms, internal or external. The disciples boarded the boat with the ease of those who had crossed that sea dozens of times, but for some reason, that night, even the air seemed to breathe faster. And if you've ever experienced moments when your heart sensed something before your eyes saw it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The boat glided over the first waves as the light faded completely. And I want you to imagine that moment. It wasn't just the day ending, it was as if the world was closing its curtains to reveal something hidden. The wind began to blow differently, almost as if whispering truths that no one wanted to hear. And it's curious how anxiety in our lives does exactly the same thing. It doesn't invade all at once. It approaches slowly, like an invisible messenger, warning that what is to come may be greater than we can control. And then, the first strong gust hit the boat. The sea, until then obedient, changed its mood in a matter of seconds. Waves that had previously seemed only to play with the hull now rose like giant hands trying to capsize everything. Water began to rush in, the wind howled, and the boat creaked as if it were afraid too. And it is here that I need to confess something to you. Anxiety is exactly that. It's when the external world begins to mix with the internal world, and you no longer know if the storm is out there or inside you. Everything seems too fast, too heavy, too big. The disciples tried to maintain control, but each attempt seemed futile. They looked at each other seeking answers, only to find wide eyes, mirrors of their own despair. Each face was wet, not only from the storm's rain, but from the fear seeping from within. And perhaps you have experienced this, being surrounded by people and yet feeling that no one can save you from the emotional chaos that is drowning you. It's a loneliness that screams even in crowded places. And in the midst of all this, Jesus was in the boat, present, real, but silent. And that always touches me deeply, because just like that night, I too have often wondered why God seems so quiet precisely when I am most desperate. There is a mystery in the way He watches us as the storm rages. It's not indifference, it's intention. It's as if He is waiting for the exact moment when our strength runs out to reveal something that can only be seen when the wind is high and the heart is weary. And this is where I want you to hold my hand and come with me. Because the storm we see is not the storm Jesus sees. The disciples believed they were going to die, but Jesus knew something they hadn't yet discovered. There's a profound detail in this story, something that changes everything, and when you see it, you might realize that your anxiety never had the last word. The storm gained strength so quickly it seemed to have a life of its own. The waves crashed against the hull as if trying to tear the boat from the disciples' hands, and the wind blew with an almost conscious fury, as if it knew the weaknesses of each one of them. I can imagine the salty taste of the water invading my mouth, the cold seeping into my bones, the darkness swallowing the horizon. It is in moments like these that anxiety ceases to be just a thought. It becomes an environment, an entire world within us. And when that happens, we are no longer just afraid, we are surrounded by it. The disciples held the ropes tightly, but the boat seemed too small for that wild immensity. And I see in that scene a perfect portrait of many phases of our lives. There are moments when everything around us becomes too big, too fast, too heavy. And the more we try to control, the more we feel we are losing the battle. Anxiety whispers that something terrible is going to happen, and that voice grows inside us until it seems to be the only thing we can hear. And, strange as it may seem, it's not the storm that kills us. It's what it awakens. I imagine the disciples' gazes growing increasingly desperate, as if searching each other's faces for some certainty, some trace of hope. But all they found was a reflection of their own terror, and there's something profoundly human about that. When we're anxious, we desperately seek something familiar to bring us security, a face, a word, a gesture. But often, everything around us is just as frightened as we are, and that makes us even more vulnerable, because we realize that not even our points of reference can anchor us. Amidst all of this, the figure of Jesus remained there, so close and at the same time so mysteriously calm. He observed the storm as one who sees beyond it. And this part always touches me deeply, because anxiety convinces us that God should act in our time, at our speed, with our urgency. But Jesus doesn't react to panic. He reacts to purpose. And the purpose of that storm was much greater than simply crossing from one side of the sea to the other. It was to reveal something about faith and about the human heart. One of the disciples, perhaps Peter, perhaps John, finally shouts something like, "We are going to die." And at that instant, something inside me identifies with that cry. How many times have I also said that, even if not in those words? How many times has anxiety made me believe that that difficult moment was the end, that that burden would be permanent, that that pain would be eternal? Anxiety steals our perspective. It diminishes God and increases chaos. But Jesus, even being struck by the same water, even feeling the same wind, saw something completely different. He knew that the storm had no final power, only temporary. And this is where a profound secret begins to unfold. Before calming the sea, Jesus would allow the disciples to confront something within themselves that needed to surface. It wasn't just water entering the boat. It was insecurity entering their souls. It was fragility being exposed. It was faith being tested in the dark. God doesn't waste storms. He uses them. You'll see that there was something that night that none of them imagined, something that would forever change the way we face anxiety. The rain began to fall heavily, cutting through the air like tiny, icy blades. Each drop seemed to carry a weight that wasn't just physical, it was emotional. The water lashed the disciples' faces, and for a moment all they saw was a blur, the darkened sky, the raging sea, the boat creaking as if begging for mercy. And I want you to feel this with me. There's a moment in anxiety when everything around you loses its shape. Nothing seems clear, nothing seems stable, nothing seems safe. It's as if the whole world collapses at once, outside and inside. And yet, Jesus remained there, silent. It is this silence that often confuses us, because when fear grows, we expect an immediate gesture, a loud word, a miracle shouted at us. But Jesus doesn't act as panic expects. He doesn't run, he doesn't despair, he isn't terrified by human urgency. And this contrast creates an almost painful tension within the soul. The disciples shouted, but he remained quiet. And perhaps you have already experienced exactly this, crying out to God with all your might, while he seems only to look at you in silence. But God's silence is never empty. It is intentional, it is surgical, it is revealing. As they tried to bail water from the boat, the disciples felt their breath become shorter, their chests tighter, their thoughts darker. Anxiety has that power. It creates such large internal storms that even small external waves seem like tsunamis. And I know what it's like to feel that way. The mind begins to imagine the worst, as if it were always one step ahead of a tragedy that hasn't even happened yet. It's strange, but anxiety never speaks of the present. It always speaks of the future. And that night, the future the disciples envisioned was simple and terrifying. We are going to die. But something profound was happening, something that, at that moment, none of them could perceive. The storm was revealing not only their fear, but what they truly believed about Jesus. When we are in the midst of anxiety, our vision of God becomes distorted. We believe He is distant, that He doesn't care, that He isn't watching, and that hurts. It hurts because the storm outside of us begins to shape the image we have of God within us. But Jesus didn't sleep out of indifference. He slept because what frightened the disciples didn't frighten Him. I imagine Peter, his hands trembling, looking at Jesus as if to say, "How can you remain so calm when everything is falling apart around us?" And perhaps you have had this same question in your soul. How can God remain at peace when we are sinking? How can He remain steadfast when our hearts are breaking? It is because He sees the end while we only see the present. He sees the purpose while we see the chaos. He knows that the sea that seems to want to destroy will be the same sea that will witness the miracle. And it is here that something decisive happens, something that prepares the heart for what is to come. The storm is still raging. The disciples are still desperate. Jesus is still quiet. But something is changing. Not around them, but within them. It is the question that arises in the depths of their souls. If He is here, why am I so afraid? It is this question that opens the door to the miracle, because Jesus doesn't calm the storm outside first. He goes straight to the epicenter of the storm within us. The wind changed direction so quickly it seemed to have received an invisible order. It was now coming from all sides, pushing the boat wherever it wanted, as if the sea had decided to swallow those men whole. The wood creaked, the water rushed in mercilessly, and each wave seemed higher than the last. And there is a moment, amidst the anxiety, when the body no longer reacts. It only feels. It feels the weight in the chest, the shortness of breath, the cold running down the spine. It's as if the heart sinks, even before the boat sinks. And that was exactly the moment the disciples were experiencing, the instant when the soul begins to give way before the body does. Some tried to row, others held the ropes, others just looked to the sky, searching for some answer. And I can hear the sound of their thoughts, because it's the same sound that has echoed within me and perhaps within you. I can't take it anymore. It's not just a cry of despair, it's a confession. A confession that strength is gone, that control is lost, that fear has won. Anxiety does that. It exhausts not only the body, but hope. And when hope weakens, the storm seems even bigger, even more alive, even more cruel. Pedro, perhaps with his hands slipping on the wet mast, looks at the others, searching for any certainty. João tries to keep his voice steady, but his breathing betrays the terror he feels. Tomé observes the horizon as if searching for a way out, but finds only darkness. All of them, strong men, experienced fishermen, were now on the verge of collapse, and I realized something here. Anxiety doesn't choose the weak. It visits precisely those who have already fought hard, carried much, endured much. It presents itself when the soul is too weary to feign courage. And yet, Jesus remained there, not desperate, not hurried, not overcome by panic, just present, just whole. Just Him, and this creates such an absurd contrast that it's disconcerting. Their world was crumbling, but Jesus' gaze seemed to see beyond the obvious. He saw further. He saw the other side of the storm. He saw the purpose hidden in the pain. He saw what we often forget, that anxiety is not greater than the one who is in the boat with us. But the disciples still couldn't understand. They still couldn't breathe deeply enough to believe. The shouts grew louder. Their hands trembled more violently. And this is where something very human happens. They approach Jesus to wake Him. And this movement is not just physical, it's emotional, spiritual, existential. It's the movement we make when we realize that no other solution exists. It's when all our strategies fail, all our strength runs out, all our certainties are lost. It's when finally the soul says, "I need Him." And there is nothing truer than that. Anxiety is often where we realize our absolute dependence on God. But there is something profound, almost hidden, about to happen. The kind of revelation that doesn't arise when the sea is calm, but when the soul is at its limit. And it is this revelation that will transform not only the storm, but the hearts of the disciples forever. Because before Jesus speaks to the wind, he will speak to them. He will touch exactly the point where anxiety arises. And what he says is so simple and so powerful that it changes everything. The boat was rocking so violently it seemed about to break apart. The water was already up to the disciples' ankles, and each new wave brought with it the feeling that this would be the last. They ran to Jesus, almost stumbling, almost falling, almost giving up. And when they finally reached him, the voice that came from them was not a calm prayer. It was a torn, desperate, almost painful cry. "Lord, we are going to die. Don't you care?" This question crosses the centuries and touches the soul deeply, because it is the question that at some point in life we have all asked ourselves. Not with words, perhaps, but with tears, with silence, with exhaustion. Jesus opens his eyes, and that moment for me has always carried a divine weight. Not because he was sleeping carelessly, but because his awakening was the revelation of something much greater. He looks around, sees the water, sees the desperate faces, sees the chaos, but is not impressed by any of it. His gaze pierces the storm as if he sees something the disciples could not yet see. And then, before speaking to the sea, he speaks to their hearts. "Why are you so afraid?" It is at that moment that something changes. Because Jesus is not asking about the wind, he is asking about the soul. This question echoes like a mirror. Because anxiety doesn't stem from what we see, it stems from what we believe. It's not the storm that destroys us, it's the meaning we give it. The disciples believed they were alone, that God was too silent, too distant, too indifferent. And that's what fuels anxiety within us, the mistaken idea that God isn't seeing, that he isn't hearing, that he isn't acting. But Jesus was there the whole time, breathing the same air, feeling the same wind, sharing the same boat. And yet, they thought they were abandoned. I imagine the scene in slow motion, the disciples trembling, their eyes filled with tears and fear. Jesus calmly rising with that peace that never depends on circumstances. His question hanging in the air, cutting through the storm from within before cutting it from without. It's as if he was saying, "I am here. I have always been. I will always be." Why does fear speak so loudly in your heart? This is the question that exposes the core of anxiety. It's not about the noise of the sea, but about the silence of trust. When faith breaks, fear multiplies, and suddenly Jesus' presence begins to reorganize the atmosphere even before it reorganizes the waves. The disciples take a deep breath, struggling, trying to understand what was happening. Part of them still wanted to fight, row, shout. Another part just wanted to fall at his feet and cry. Because when we are exhausted, God's presence is more healing than any explanation. It's as if he was saying, "You don't need to understand now. Just let me be here, by your side." And that closeness, that hand on the shoulder of the soul, changes everything. But what is about to happen goes beyond any miracle. Because Jesus will not only show that he has power over the sea, he will show that he has power over what frightens us within. He will speak to the chaos, he will confront the wind, he will silence the water. But before that, he is about to reveal something that perhaps the disciples never realized until that moment. Something that touches the heart of those who live with anxiety. Jesus stood up in the boat as one who awakens not to react to chaos, but to govern it. The wind roared so loudly it seemed to want to swallow the voice of any man, but not his. There is something in the silence before Christ's word that always impresses me. It's as if the whole world holds its breath for a second, waiting for what will happen. The disciples watched every movement, every step, every gesture. They were soaked, tired, trembling. But there was something in Jesus' gaze that didn't match the surrounding panic. It was firmness. It was authority. It was peace in the flesh in the face of the chaos in the water. The storm, which had previously dominated the scene, seemed to hesitate when he positioned himself at the bow. It's strange to say this, but there are moments in life when our anxiety makes noise until it finds someone who speaks louder than it. Jesus' presence that night had a different weight. He wasn't fighting the wind. He wasn't resisting the waves. He was above them, as if the sea were a stage and he the only one who knew the script. The disciples expected a miracle, but perhaps they didn't understand that the true miracle would begin within them, not outside. And then Jesus opened his mouth. 2 words, simple, profound, unwavering. Peace, be still. They were not shouts. They were not desperate orders. They were words spoken with the serenity of one who knows that the sea obeys. And I want you to imagine the scene with me. The wind seems to recede like an animal that recognizes its true master. The waves, once wild, begin to break apart, to subside, to align themselves like soldiers receiving an order. The water breathes deeply. The storm loses its voice, and the entire chaos bows before a command that does not come from outside. It comes from the Creator himself. This moment always moves me because I see a profound truth in it. When Jesus speaks, anxiety doesn't just disappear from the outside. It loses its right to reign within us. His voice is not just a sound, it's a presence that reorganizes everything, our thoughts, our emotions, our fears. And that's why the peace of Christ is not the absence of struggle, but the presence of someone who masters what masters us. That night the sea grew still, but something within the disciples also began to grow still. I keep imagining the silence that followed, a thick, profound, almost sacred silence, the water becoming a mirror. The wind stopping so quickly, it seemed impossible to believe there had been a storm a minute before. The boat, previously on the verge of collapse, now floated as if carried by peace itself. And the disciples, still breathless, looked around trying to understand what had just happened. It's always like this when God intervenes. First, we try to understand. Then, we try to breathe. And only then do we realize that the impossible has just happened before our eyes. But there is something even deeper about to be revealed. Because in calming the sea, Jesus wasn't just showing power, he was showing identity. He was showing who he is and who we are when we are with him. And this revelation is no small thing. It's transformative. It's the kind of truth that changes the way you face every storm in your life. Next, you'll see the impact of this revelation on the disciples, and perhaps you'll realize that it's about to change something within you too. The silence that enveloped the sea seemed impossible to describe. It was so profound, so absolute, that it made even the heart hesitate before beating again. The waves, which minutes before roared like untamed beasts, now lay soft as an animal tamed by the voice of its creator. It was as if the whole world were witnessing a miracle that did not depend on movement, but on stillness. And this contrast, from chaos to peace, reveals much about Jesus. He not only controls the storm, he is greater than it, and when he reveals himself, peace is not just relief, it is a declaration. The disciples, still trembling, began to look at each other as if trying to piece together what had just happened. Their breathing was still rapid, their bodies still felt the effects of the struggle, but their minds were trying to comprehend the identity of the one who was beside them in the boat. They had seen Jesus heal the sick, cast out demons, restore lives, teach with authority. But this was different. Nature doesn't respond to just anyone. The sea doesn't listen to any voice. Chaos doesn't bow before any presence, and they perceived, perhaps for the first time, the true dimension of the one who was with them. It is at this point that anxiety confronts a greater truth. Because when we are at the peak of fear, we believe we are alone, vulnerable, on the verge of collapse. But at that moment, the disciples realized something transformative. It wasn't the storm that determined their fate. It was who was in the boat. It's as if Jesus had said without words, "You have never been at the mercy of the sea. The sea has always been at my mercy." And this revelation begins to displace anxiety from the center of the soul, because when we understand who is with us, fear loses its throne. The disciples were overcome by a different kind of awe, no longer the paralyzing fear, but the awakening awe. The Bible says they asked themselves, "Who is this, that even the wind and the waves obey him?" And this question wasn't just curiosity, it was the beginning of a spiritual awakening, because faith isn't born simply when we see what God does. It's born when we understand who God is. There's a difference between seeing miracles and knowing their author. And in that boat, the disciples were having a revelation that would transform their every step from then on. I imagine their expressions slowly changing. The tension was still there, but now mixed with admiration, respect, wonder, and hope. Because if Jesus has authority over the sea, he also has authority over the inner storms that try to destroy us. If the wind hears his voice, anxiety can hear it too. And that is one of the greatest secrets of this story. Jesus doesn't calm the storms just to show power. He calms them to show closeness. He wants us to know that as long as we are with him, no storm will have the last word. And this is where the journey takes on an even greater depth, because what comes after the storm is not just relief, it's transformation. The peace that Jesus brings is not a pause in pain, it's a redefinition of the soul. At this moment, you will see how this peace begins to seep into the most hidden places of the human heart, revealing something that perhaps you also need to hear today. The calm that enveloped the sea didn't mean that everything within the disciples was already at peace. Their bodies still trembled, their hearts still beat rapidly, their breathing was still labored, as if trying to convince themselves that they were safe, even after facing their own limits. And I need to tell you something. Anxiety doesn't go away the exact second the external storm ceases. It leaves traces, it leaves echoes, it leaves memories. And that's exactly what happened that night. The sea calmed down quickly, but their souls took a few seconds longer. True healing doesn't begin in the water, it begins in the heart. The boat now rocked gently, almost as a reminder that they were still at sea, but that nothing there could threaten them anymore. Even so, the disciples hesitated to take a deep breath, and this reminds me of something so human, so real. Sometimes God has already calmed what was outside, but we remain trapped by what is inside. The mind relives the storm. The chest still aches from the fright. The soul is still searching for a point of support that seems firm. It's the moment after the danger, that instant where the body is safe, but the emotion is still fading. Anxiety works like that. It continues to talk even when the chaos is gone. Peter wipes his wet face. It's impossible to tell if it's water or tears. John looks at the horizon, trying to process the impossible he has just witnessed. James observes his trembling hand and wonders why he still feels fear even after the miracle. This is where everything makes sense. Anxiety doesn't disintegrate with a visible miracle. It transforms when we recognize the invisible presence of Jesus. The storm was necessary not to frighten them, but to reveal them, to show how much still needed to be healed, restored, aligned with the voice of Christ. Jesus walked slowly through the boat, and each step seemed to rearrange the atmosphere around him. It was as if his peace had weight, presence, density, a peace that doesn't come from everything being calm, but that makes everything calm wherever he goes. He looked at each of them, and I imagine that look carried more than comfort, it carried truth. Because anxiety often stems from the lie that says we are alone, abandoned, invisible. And Jesus' presence dismantles that lie without needing to raise his voice. He didn't say, "You are weak." He didn't say, "You exaggerated." He was simply there, and that was enough. The peace that Jesus brought that night was not just a feeling. It was a revelation. The revelation that faith is not the opposite of fear. It is the answer to fear. It is the space within the soul where we remember who is with us, even when everything seems to be against us. I imagine the disciples sitting up slowly, as if trying to rediscover their own bodies. And little by little, the silence of that night ceased to be frightening and became sacred. A silence where the soul can hear something that can only be heard after the storm. You are not alone. I am here. And it is at this point that the story takes an even deeper step. Because now that the sea is calm and hearts are beginning to breathe again, Jesus is about to reveal something that is not about waves, nor about wind, nor about fear. It is about purpose. It is about identity. It is about the kind of faith that is born not when everything is going well, but when everything seemed lost. And this revelation may be exactly what you need to recognize that anxiety does not define you. It only exposes the place where Jesus wants to act. The boat now sailed on a sea so calm that it seemed impossible to imagine the chaos of just minutes before. But that's how life is sometimes. Circumstances change quickly, but the heart takes time to keep up. The disciples were quiet, not for lack of words, but because they were trying to understand what the storm had torn from within them. Old fears, hidden insecurities, questions never asked. Anxiety has this power. It doesn't create new monsters. It only illuminates those already in the dark. And Jesus knew this. That's why he not only calmed the sea, he calmed the mirror of their souls. As they gazed at the horizon, I imagine each of them remembering what they felt at the height of the panic. It wasn't just waves crashing against the boat. It was waves of doubt crashing against faith. And the storm showed them something they might never admit in calmer days. There were places within them where fear still ruled. And that's not a sin. It's human. Jesus didn't judge them for feeling fear. He invited them to see the fear so he could free them from it. Anxiety, however devastating it may seem, is sometimes precisely the setting where God reveals our deepest wounds. Peter wondered why his courage had vanished so quickly. James tried to understand why his heart always raced toward the worst-case scenario. John reflected on why his soul was so sensitive to the chaos around him. And I need to tell you, just like them, each of us carries within ourselves a particular storm. Something that stirs just by thinking about it. Something that steals our breath. Something that seems bigger than us. But Jesus doesn't expose our fear to shame us. He exposes it to heal us. And in that boat, before a sea that now reflected the stars, he was about to transform the trauma of the storm into a school of faith. When Jesus asked, "Why are you so afraid?" he wasn't asking for an explanation. He was offering a revelation. Their fear didn't stem from a lack of skill. They were experienced fishermen. The fear came from a distorted view of what it meant to be with him. They still saw him as a teacher, as a prophet, as a guide, but they didn't see him as Lord of the sea, Lord of the wind, Lord of existence. And anxiety grows precisely in that space, between the Jesus we know in theory and the Jesus we know in the storm. That night marked something within them. The calm was not just any relief, it was a reconfiguration. Their souls were being repositioned, aligned with a truth that would be profoundly understood much later. It is not the absence of storms that defines our safety, but the presence of Jesus in them. And this is the revelation that transforms anxiety, because it removes fear from the center and puts Christ in its place. And when Christ occupies the center, the storm loses its strength, the wind loses its voice, and our soul finally breathes. But Jesus wasn't finished yet. Because the storm had shown them who they were, but now he was going to show them where they were going. And this part is so profound that it changes the course not only of their journey, but of their entire lives, and perhaps yours as well. The night was already brighter, as if the sky had decided to lift the veil that had covered the world moments before. The clouds slowly parted, revealing a firmament that seemed to breathe after so much accumulated tension. The sea reflected the stars with an almost unreal gentleness, denying any memory of the fury that had roared moments before. But the disciples knew, deep in their souls, that none of this had been accidental. The crossing had not been interrupted by the storm, it had been shaped by it. And now, as the boat glided toward the other shore, understanding began to form. Jesus did not take them out of the storm. He led them through it with purpose and intention. The silence that hung over the boat was not empty. It was a silence laden with questions, with reflections that echoed within each of them. They gazed at the horizon, but their thoughts were turned inward, where fear and faith had waged an intense battle. The anxiety they had felt still left its traces, and each deep breath seemed an attempt to reorganize what had been shaken. But at the same time, a new feeling was growing within them, a kind of understanding that only arises when survival ceases to be instinct and becomes revelation. The storm had been more than a danger, it had been a silent teacher. I imagine Peter running his fingers along the edge of the boat, feeling the wet wood, as if trying to reconnect with reality. He knew how to navigate, he knew that sea, but nothing he saw that night fit into his experience. John watched the movement of the waves, noticing that each one seemed more obedient now, as if recognizing that something greater had passed through there. James took a deep breath, trying to organize within himself what had been broken and what had been rebuilt, and in each of them something silent cried out. The storm revealed who we are, but it also revealed who he is. Anxiety always tries to hide this truth, but faith insists on remembering. Jesus remained there, silent but not distant. He contemplated the other shore with the serenity of someone who had already seen the end from the beginning. And that is what anxiety tries to steal from us, the vision that God is already in tomorrow while we are still trying to survive the present. The disciples were beginning to realize that Jesus does not react to chaos. He reigns over it. The storm did not delay the crossing. It prepared their hearts for what was to come. Because with Jesus, nothing is wasted. The wind becomes a classroom, the waves become a mirror, fear becomes revelation. The other shore was still shrouded in a soft twilight, but every meter the boat advanced seemed to carry a prophetic weight. They were going to an unknown place, and that same uncertainty that had previously fueled anxiety now fueled expectation. Their hearts opened to something new, something they couldn't name, but could feel. And it's the same in our journey. There are times when God doesn't explain where we're going. He simply calls us to keep rowing alongside him. Anxiety tries to paralyze us, but faith pushes us forward, even when we don't fully understand the path. As the bow moved forward, I could almost feel what was happening inside them. The chaos was receding, but the transformation remained. And the crossing that had previously seemed like just a route was now becoming a calling. Because what Jesus had begun in their souls during that storm was not yet finished. He was preparing every detail to show that pain is never the final chapter of the story. Next, you will see how this crossing connects to a much deeper storm, not in the sky, but within a man who had been waiting for liberation for years. The silhouette of the land appeared on the horizon like a shadow laden with mystery, and the disciples felt their hearts tighten again, not from fear, but from foreboding. The other shore seemed not merely a geographical destination, it seemed a spiritual territory. The steep hills revealed shapes that blended into the night, and the air carried a heavy silence, the kind of silence that precedes unseen battles. Nothing there was welcoming, nothing invited one to linger. It was as if that place had forgotten the light long ago. And as the boat touched the sand, the disciples realized something. The storm they had left behind was small compared to what they would find in that land. The ground was hard and cold, as if it held stories of torment. The region of the Gerasenes was known for being inhabited by men who dealt with forces no one understood. The tombs carved into the rocks formed a somber scene, like open mouths waiting for lives that never found rest. The smell was of abandonment, the wind was harsh. And in that almost living darkness, something was moving, something that was coming towards them. The disciples, still recovering their emotional breath from the storm, felt the tension rise like a silent wave. They realized they were about to face not a natural danger, but a human, spiritual, emotional danger, all at once. The man came running, his steps seemingly driven by forces beyond the flesh. His thin body was marked by open wounds, old scars and recent bruises. His disheveled hair moved in the wind, and his eyes, oh those eyes, had the intensity of a sky that never knew dawn. They conveyed not only pain, they conveyed loss, abandonment, inner violence. He came screaming, but his screams were not directed at the disciples. It was as if he were screaming to expel his own existence, like someone fighting against something invisible that controls him from within. The disciples recoiled, not for lack of faith, but because of the humanity that still trembled within them. And this is where something profound happens. The anxiety they had experienced on the boat connected unexpectedly with that man's pain. The fear that paralyzed them for a few minutes was that human being's entire life. He lived in constant torment, without rest, without light, without affection, trapped inside a storm that never ceased. And suddenly everything made sense. Jesus didn't take them through the storm just to show authority over the sea. He took them so that they could recognize the storm in others. That man's pain was an exaggerated echo of the pain that lived within each of them. And that is why God allows us to face our own storms, so that we can see the storms of others with compassion. The man ran to Jesus and fell before him, not because he was surrendering, but because Jesus' presence destabilized what dominated him. What cried out in that man was not his soul. It was everything that had taken his soul captive. And Jesus remained firm. He did not retreat. He was not frightened. He was not indignant. He simply looked. But his gaze was so deep, so full, so absolute, that it seemed to pierce the chaos and reach the man inside, the true man, the one who was still alive, even if suffocated. The disciples watched in silence, feeling something within themselves that they could not explain. The storm at sea had taught them to trust. And now they needed to trust again. And in that instant, a revelation formed in their hearts. A revelation that perhaps you too are feeling now. The storm you face is not just about you. It prepares you to see the other, to feel the other, to recognize your own scars in the other, to become an instrument of healing in a world where many still live trapped in invisible storms. And Jesus, looking at that man, was about to show the disciples and us that the authority that calms the sea is the same authority that calms the soul. The man approached with a speed that seemed to defy his own body. His cut feet dragged sand, stones, and old wounds, but nothing seemed to stop his march. His face was a portrait of accumulated torment, and his eyes betrayed sleepless nights, days without identity, years without peace. He was the storm incarnate. His cries echoed through the hills like thunder that found no sky to dissipate. And, as he ran, the disciples felt their hearts tighten. That storm did not come from outside. It came from within. It was the storm that no boat could navigate. It was the storm that no man could survive alone. When Jesus took a step toward him, something in the atmosphere changed in an almost palpable way. It wasn't a noisy miracle. It wasn't a visible manifestation. It was the atmosphere, a presence that carried both calm and authority. The disciples saw it. They felt it. It was as if every particle of air recognized who he was. And faced with this presence, the man didn't fall because of despair, but because his soul, so fragmented, encountered for the first time in a long time something that confronted it with love and not with condemnation. And I need you to understand this. Jesus always approaches pain, never turns away from it. The man screamed, but that scream wasn't human. It was desperate, like someone trying to resist the intervention of something greater. His arms contorted, his body weakened, but his eyes, for a brief second, met Jesus's. And in that instant, in that second that passed too quickly for any disciple to notice, there was a cry for help hidden amidst the confusion. That's how pain works. It dresses itself in aggression, resistance, chaos, but behind it all there's always a soul begging to be freed. Anxiety is like that too. It screams, it writhes, it seems to dominate, but deep inside, there's always a part of you crying out, "Jesus, see me." The disciples watched everything with attention that mixed fear and compassion. They recognized some of the man's feelings. At sea, they too had felt panic. They too had felt shortness of breath. They too had felt their hearts skip a beat. The difference was that for them, the storm lasted minutes. For that man, it lasted years. And that is why God allowed them to go through the storm, so that they might recognize in the other what natural eyes could not see. Empathy is born when pain finds a mirror, and that night the souls of the disciples were the mirror of that pain. Then Jesus bent down slightly, not with arrogant authority, not with brute force, not with contempt. He bent down as one approaches a child trembling with fear, and his voice, when it came out, was not loud, it was firm. It was a voice that opened a space in the chaos, a voice that did not argue with the darkness, but commanded it, "Come out of him." 2 words, just 2, but laden with the same authority that had silenced the sea. And I want you to feel this. When Jesus speaks to your anxiety, he speaks like this. He doesn't argue with fear. He doesn't negotiate with terror. He commands that which imprisons you to lose its right over you. The man began to tremble. His cries echoed like torn thunder. But at the same time, something was being undone, broken, torn away. The disciples saw in his eyes the struggle between what dominated him and what was being freed. And at that moment, they realized something that would forever change how they understood faith. The true spiritual battle doesn't happen in heaven nor on earth. It happens within the human heart. That is where Jesus wins. That is where he reigns. That is where he transforms. The storm at sea was only a prelude. The real miracle was happening right there, before them, inside that man whom no one believed could be restored. And then, slowly, as if the very air breathed differently, the struggle ceased. The man fell to his knees, no longer in torment but in relief. His eyes, once so full of fury, now carried an emptiness that was beginning to be filled with peace. It was as if his soul was slowly returning to his body, recognizing every space, remembering every forgotten part of himself. And the disciples, moved, realized the great truth of that night. The authority that calms the sea is the same authority that calms the soul. And if he can free someone from such torment, He can also free you from the anxiety that overwhelms you. From now on, you will see the complete transformation and the profound purpose behind this encounter. Because Jesus doesn't just set free, he restores, he reintegrates, he rewrites stories that seemed lost. When the man's liberation was finally complete, the silence that enveloped the region was not the heavy silence of a storm at sea, nor the tense silence that follows fear. It was a different silence, full, almost palpable. It was as if even the stones, the hills, and the tombs had stopped to observe what had happened. The man who had previously run among the tombs, shouting, hurting himself, was now sitting. That alone was a miracle, to be sitting, present, whole in that moment. His eyes, once dark and uncontrolled, now reflected something he perhaps no longer remembered: peace. It wasn't just external calm. It was an inner rest, as if his soul had, after years, found a place to breathe without fear. And the disciples watched, perhaps unable to put it into words, but feeling that this exact scene was the true summary of everything they had experienced since the first wind at sea. Jesus remained close to him, not as one who finishes a task and walks away, but as one who witnesses someone's rebirth. I imagine the scene in detail. The man's hands, once used to break chains or injure himself, now resting on his knees, his chest, once heaving, now breathing at a new rhythm. His mind, once invaded by voices, now silent enough to hear another voice, the voice of Christ, which does not shout, does not oppress, does not accuse. And it is here that I see something very profound. The storm at sea showed that Jesus has authority over the chaos around him, but the liberation of this man showed that he has authority over the chaos within us. It is one thing to believe that God calms what is outside. It is quite another, much more difficult, to believe that he can calm what has been agitating us inside for years. The inhabitants of that place approached with fear, curiosity, and resistance. They knew that man. They knew his history. They knew that no one had managed to contain him, that chains were not enough, that no system had worked. They expected to see the same old monster, the same figure that frightened children and adults, the same symbol of lack of control. But instead, they found someone dressed, sitting, and in his right mind. And their reaction is a portrait of what happens even today. Some people rejoice in liberation, others feel threatened by it. Because when Jesus enters the scene and truly changes someone, he doesn't just affect the person, he affects the environment, the agreements, the structures. And that is why often the world prefers to live with someone trapped in its storm, rather than deal with the radical transformation that the gospel brings. That man, now lucid, made the most understandable request of all. He wanted to follow Jesus. He wanted to get into the boat, go along, stay close, live glued to that gaze that had finally lifted the weight from his soul. And I confess to you, if it were me, I would ask the same. After a lifetime of torment, who wouldn't want to be near the only presence that brought true relief? But Jesus, with a wisdom that goes far beyond human comfort, responded in a surprising way. He sent him back. He asked him to return to his home, to his city, to his family, and tell them everything the Lord had done for him and how he had shown him mercy. In other words, Jesus said, "You are no longer just someone who has been freed. Now you are a witness. I not only pulled you out of the storm, I will use you to reach those who are still in it." The disciples, hearing this, began to connect the dots. The storm at sea hadn't just been an episode of panic followed by a miracle. It had been a lesson. They needed to feel their own fear being crushed to better understand the fear of others. They needed to perceive their own anxiety at its limit in order to later recognize the hidden storms in the eyes of the people they would meet along the way. God does this with us too. the struggles you face today, the nights when your chest tightens and your mind won't shut off, the moments when you feel you can't take it anymore. None of that is useless in the hands of Jesus. He doesn't waste pain. He transforms pain into a tool. He takes what almost sank you and makes it a testimony that will reach people you can't even imagine. The storm at sea prepared you, but the storm in others reveals to you the reason why you didn't sink. As the boat prepared to depart, I imagine a final glance exchanged between the disciples and that now restored man. They were going to continue their journey with Jesus. He would remain in that place, but not as before. Before, he was a symbol of pain, of lack of control, of fear. Now he would be a living sign of grace. Before, his story frightened. Now his story healed. And this deeply touches our reality. Perhaps you think your past is only shame, burden, failure, chronic anxiety, moments you would like to forget. But in the hands of Jesus, even what shames you today can become an instrument of healing tomorrow. What you call my worst phase may be exactly the door through which God will enter to reach people who would never be touched by a technical discourse, but will be reached by your vulnerability full of grace. The boat then slowly moves away from the shore. The restored man remains behind, but no longer as someone abandoned. Now he stands as someone with a mission. The disciples follow Jesus, but they are no longer the same ones who boarded that boat the previous afternoon. They will still feel fear in other situations. They will still have doubts. They will still fail because they are human. But something has profoundly changed. They now know that Jesus is not just a teacher who teaches on sunny days. He is the Lord who remains in stormy days. They know that he is not only interested in grand public signs, but in liberating souls that no one else sees. They know that anxiety is not a character flaw, but a place where Jesus wants to enter with a still, small voice saying, I am here. I have not left you. I will not abandon you in the middle of the sea. And this is where I look at you. Yes, at you who have been with me until now, navigating through this story. Perhaps your storm has no water, no wind, no boat, but it has thoughts that won't stop, sleepless nights, fears you can't explain, a feeling that something bad is going to happen even when everything is relatively well. Perhaps you feel like the disciples in that boat, with the impression that God is too quiet, or perhaps you are more like that man of the tombs, carrying old pains, traumas, guilt, marks that no one sees. I want to tell you with all the care of my heart, Jesus is in your boat and also on your shore. He sees the storm you are facing, but he also sees who you will reach when that storm is over. If this message finds you in a place of anxiety, don't think that this is a sign that God has abandoned you. On the contrary, sometimes it is precisely at the limit when you think, I can't take it anymore, that the heart finally stops fighting alone and does what the disciples did. It runs to Jesus and awakens him, not because he is sleeping, but because you finally recognize that you can no longer control everything. And in that place, he rises. Sometimes he calms the outer sea. Sometimes before that, he calms the inner sea. In both cases, he remains the same, the Christ who masters the wind, the water, the mind, the heart, the past, and the future. Anxiety does not define your identity. The storm is not your name. What defines you is who is in the boat and who set foot on your inner shore to meet you. If you feel that this word spoke to you, not because I said it, but because the Holy Spirit did something while you were listening, I want to invite you at this moment to do just one simple thing. Take a deep breath. Right where you are. Take a deep breath and in your own way, with your own words, say to Jesus, Lord, enter my storm. Calm what I cannot calm. Speak to what I cannot control. I let you into my boat, into my mind, into my story. You don't need fancy phrases. You don't need to know how to pray correctly. He understood the disciples' cry. He understood the cry of the possessed man. He understands when all you can say is, "Help me." And he comes. Sometimes not in the time that anxiety demands, but always in the perfect time of grace. I don't know where you are in the journey. Maybe you're still at the beginning, when the sky starts to darken and you feel that pressure in your chest, but you still don't know what's going to happen. Maybe you're already in the middle of the storm, feeling like you're about to sink. Or maybe you're in that strange calm where everything seems okay on the outside, but inside there's still an echo of fear. What I do know is that Jesus goes through all the phases with you. He gets into the boat during the calm, stays in it during the storm, speaks to you in the silence after the wind, disembarks on the other shore, and shows you that nothing you've experienced was in vain. The storm is not the end of the story. In the kingdom of God, it is always the beginning of something that goes beyond you, something that transforms, heals, reaches, liberates. If this message is affecting you in any way, keep it in your heart. You are not a mistake about to sink. You are a testament in the making. And as Jesus heals your anxiety, he also empowers you to recognize the storms others are facing, to put a hand on someone's shoulder and say, "I know what it's like, but I also know who is with us in the boat." If you wish, continue walking with me here on this channel. There is much more in the scriptures that can speak to your pain, calm your mind, and strengthen your faith. May this word find your heart like a lighthouse in a dark night. May the Lord Jesus himself be the peace within your storm, and may you one day look back and say, "I made it through. He was with me the whole time, and now with him, I help others to make it through as well." The sea was so still, it seemed to have completely forgotten what it was like to roar. It was as if the entire surface had been stretched by the hand of God, until it had become a vast mantle of liquid glass. The boat moved slowly, cutting through the water with a sound so soft it resembled breathing more than movement. And in that absolute silence, which was not the absence of life but the presence of something sacred, the disciples began to realize that they were sailing not just on a body of water, but on a spiritual threshold. The night, which had previously seemed an enemy, now became an accomplice. The sky shed its last shades of purple and deep blue, and among the already dispersed clouds, timid stars appeared, as if observing the journey of those men with reverence. Each point of light in the firmament seemed to tell a story, but none as intense as the one that had happened a few hours before. The storm was no longer just a memory. It had become a landmark, a watershed moment between who they were and who they were becoming. The anxiety that had dominated them, the fear that had paralyzed them, the feeling of helplessness, everything now echoed like an unexpected invitation to a deeper faith. Pedro, sitting near the bow, watched his hands. They still trembled slightly, not from cold, but from awareness. "I thought we were going to die," he may have said silently. It wasn't shame, it was the truth. He wasn't used to admitting vulnerability. He had been a fisherman since he was a boy. He knew the sea, he knew the wind, he knew the limits of a boat. He even knew his own limits. But that night, he discovered something he had never considered. There are storms that no man, however experienced, can weather alone. And this revelation, though harsh, brought with it a kind of freedom. Because recognizing vulnerability before Jesus is not humiliation, it is the beginning of healing. John, on the other hand, looked at Jesus with a gaze that mixed tenderness, admiration, and wonder. He tried to understand not only what had happened, but what it meant. The image of Jesus rising amidst the chaos, his clothes soaked, his hair blown by the wind, his eyes as firm as fire. That image would never leave his mind. How could someone carry so much peace amidst so much despair? How could someone sleep while the world seemed to crumble around them? And even more, How could someone calm the sea with 2 words? John was beginning to realize that everything he thought he knew about Jesus was just a crumb compared to what was before him. Tiago, always quieter, watched the horizon. He didn't talk much, but he felt a lot. And what he felt at that moment was almost indescribable. The storm had stripped him bare inside, tearing away certainties, tearing away control, tearing away the false security that many of us create to survive. He realized that anxiety, like the wind, sometimes arrives uninvited, crosses doors we don't close, and touches places we thought were protected. But if there was something even closer than the storm, it was Jesus. He was as close during the chaos as he was now in the calm. And this understanding was so precious that Tiago almost felt his chest burning. The sea remained absolute, motionless, almost eternal. But at the same time it seemed to listen. Each gentle wave seemed to pay attention to the disciples' thoughts, as if the ocean itself recognized that it had been the stage for something that would change history. Not only theirs, but that of all who would one day hear this story. The boat moved forward slowly, and the further it moved, the more the disciples realized they were leaving behind not just a storm, but an older version of themselves. Jesus remained seated, gazing at the horizon with a serenity no human being could imitate. He knew that this journey did not end there. Each heart in that boat now carried seeds of faith, seeds of courage, seeds of revelation. But it also carried questions, and questions are fertile ground for transformation. He allowed the storm to come not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. Their anxiety needed to be exposed, to be dealt with. Their fear needed to scream, to be silenced. Their souls needed to tremble to finally recognize where their true foundation lay. A light breeze began to blow, moving the hair of each disciple. It wasn't the cutting wind of a storm. It was a gentle, almost paternal breeze, as if the Spirit himself were moving through the boat, touching each one in a personalized way. Peter felt this breeze as a reminder. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's who you call when fear arrives. João felt it was an invitation. Write about it someday. Tell the world who I am. Tiago felt it as a realignment. Faith grows in darkness, not in light. Each breath seemed to contain a message. Each breeze seemed to carry a cure. When the sea is calm, it's easy to think we're in control. It's easy to believe everything is going well because we are strong, intelligent, and prepared. But when the waves threaten to engulf the boat, that's when we discover who we really are and who Jesus really is. The disciples realized that the storm wasn't the enemy. The storm was the mirror. It was the lens that revealed how much they still needed to learn about trust, about surrender, about dependence, about faith. And this learning, though born in despair, now blossomed with indescribable beauty. The sky began to brighten more intensely. Blue grew clearer. Gold spread like ink, poured by the hand of God. The light touched Jesus' face first, and then spread to the others. And for an instant, it seemed as if the whole world stood still just to witness that moment, the moment when ordinary men with ordinary fears, carrying real anxieties, had found a faith that is not born from books, but from encounters, not born from theory, but from storms. And now I ask you, with all the tenderness of my heart, where are you on this journey? At what point in the night do you find yourself? At the beginning, when the sky darkens and you feel that tightness in your chest? In the middle, when everything seems out of control? Or perhaps in the calm, still trying to understand how you survived something you thought would destroy you? Regardless of where you are, the truth is the same. Jesus is in the boat. His presence doesn't depend on the weather. His authority doesn't depend on his strength. His peace doesn't depend on the absence of wind. Perhaps you are experiencing relentless anxiety, an emotional storm that no one sees. Perhaps your thoughts are agitated like waves without direction. Perhaps your heart is weary like an old boat that has rowed too much. But just as on that night, Jesus continues to rise in the midst of chaos and say, "Calm down." And this word doesn't just affect circumstances, it affects the soul. As the disciples' boat moves toward the new shore, you too move toward a new understanding of who God is in your life. Anxiety will not be your final chapter. Fear is not your name. The storm is not your destiny. He who calmed the sea is calming you too. Perhaps not at the speed your pain desires, but at the perfect speed of grace. The boat sails on, the sea breathes, the sky opens up, and Jesus remains. May this journey stay with you. May this peace walk beside you. And that truth, He is on the boat. Never leave your heart again. If in any way this journey has touched your inner storm, don't walk alone. Stay with us. There are many other stories in the Word that can calm your soul, strengthen your heart, and remind you every day that Jesus is still in the boat.